Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's cover Lynette today. We've done Liney, or Lenny, I'm again not sure how it's said, but we've covered him. Now let's talk about Lynette. We're going to do a bit of a guide, talk about how she works fundamentally, you know, the good parts, the bad parts, talk about the builds, weapons, artifacts, all the malarkey, and then give a bit of a value on everything, see if the character's going to be good, if they're going to end up being a meta breaker, or if they're going to end up being kind of just tossed to the side after one patch. First and foremost, taking a look at her Ascension stat, it's going to be Animo damage bonus, which kind of hints at her being an Animo DPS, which is kind of true. It's kind of a 50-50 on that. I'll explain as we go through the kit. But also taking a look at her Ascension materials, unfortunately, about 0% of her like farmable materials are farmable, at least pre-farmable. She has all Fontaine materials, except for obviously the Animo gem, as well as the green crystal from the from the Dendro Dragon. My apologies. No, she's not pre-farmable. So unfortunately, if you're looking to pre-farm for her, tough luck. So starting off with the kit, the normal attack, it looks basic and it pretty much does nothing. But once we get into the constellations, I'll talk about why you probably will want to level this up, as there is a bit of an Animo kind of damage boosting for normal attacks and whatnot. So bear this in mind. Baseline, not great, but level up later. As for the elemental skill, Enigmatic Feint, this one's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. She flicks her mantle, executes an Enigma Thrust, dealing Animo damage. When the Enigma Thrust hits an opponent, it will restore Lynette's HP based on her max HP, and then in the 4 seconds afterward, she will lose a certain amount of HP per second based on whether you press or hold this ability. She will use Enigma Thrust differently. Simply put, she has a press and a hold. You press it, she does an Enigma Thrust, quite simple, quite straightforward. You'll regenerate some HP, deal a bunch of damage, yada yada yada. As for the hold ability, Lynette will enter a high-speed, pilfering shadow state and apply Shadow Sign to a nearby opponent. When this high-speed state ends, Lynette will unleash an Enigma Thrust. If there is an opponent with Shadow Sign applied to them, she'll dash at them and use the Enigma Thrust on them. Only one opponent can be marked with Shadow Sign at any one time. When this opponent gets too far away from Lynette, the Shadow Sign will be cancelled. Simply put, I'll summarize that hold. It's like Yelan if she could only mark one target with her elemental skill. That's simply how the ability works. But that's fine. The next last part, I think all Fontaine characters are going to have this, but they have the Arc Uxia, or the Arc Effect, Arc He, I'm not sure how it's said, but they have this Arc Effect, which simply put is just more Animo damage, or more damage of that character's respective element. I'll probably have to cover this every time we talk about a Fontaine character, but they have this Arc Effect, which is cool. Now, simply put, the ability or the elemental skill is quite simple, quite straightforward. It's just Animo damage, but a bit of HP consumption. So I'm not going to kind of try to ramble on about it, but the percentages are pretty good. The Enigma Thrust, which happens at any time if you press or hold, deals 570% of damage, which is pretty good. The only caveat is that it's Animo damage, and so its reaction damage is not going to be too crazy. But its raw damage will be pretty good. I think it's about, not as high as Hazo's. I think Hazo's is about like 1100%, I think, or something along those lines. But again, still 570, pretty good. The Surging Blade, which is the part about the Arc Uxia, is 66. Again, it's not going to be crazy damage. It's just application of element. Interval is 10 seconds. Now to the part that matters. The HP regeneration and the HP cost. So, you'll regenerate whenever you hit an Enigma Thrust. You'll always regenerate 25% of your max HP, which is very powerful, by the way. Healing 25% of your max HP with an Enigma Thrust, very good. But that HP consumption will be 6% every 1 second. The max hold duration is 2.5, and the cooldown is 12%. So pretty good. You'll always be in a positive of HP, by the way. I think only at any given time you can consume about 12 to 18% of your max HP, which is pretty good. And you'll always restore 25, so you'll always be in a HP positive, which is very, very good. And overall, the skill is useful for damage and movement. Movement is what you're going to be using it for, much like Yelan. But Yelan's does damage, so that's a bit of a weird thing to say. But yeah, it's an okay skill. Anyway, Elemental Burst. Elemental Burst, Magic Trick, Astonishing Shift. Lynette raises her mantle high in the sky, dealing AoE Animo damage, using Skillful Sleight of Hand to make a giant Boggle Cat box appear. What are the properties of the Boggle Cat box, you may ask? Well, it taunts nearby opponents, attracting their attacks, which is very handy. It deals Animo damage to nearby opponents at certain intervals, and when the Boggle Cat box comes into contact with one of the reactable elements, Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, it will gain the corresponding element and additionally fire vivid shots that deal damage for that element at intervals. Elemental absorption of this kind can only occur once per ability usage. Very, very good. Very, very useful. We can all surmise what it's going to do. It's essentially Kazuha and Sucrose's ability. Essentially what it does, it absorbs an element and then does that element as damage. Pretty useful. As for percentages, the initial skill usage is 176%. Kind of mid. The Bogglecat damage box, which is the pulsing damage, 110. It's pulsing damage, so you'll have a fair bit more than that throughout one skill usage, which is pretty useful. As for the Vivid Shot damage, this is kind of what you're going to be using the skill for, mainly the Vivid Shot damage, 100% roughly. The damage is not going to be what you're there for. You're here for the application of element. As we know, these anime characters that do this kind of job, you're mainly there for the continuous application of a specific element while you switch over to another character to then react with that continuously applied element. That's kind of the reason you use these characters, and Lynette is probably going to be that job, at least for the most part. I'll explain once we get to the constellations. That's going to be her job there. The duration of the Bogglecat box is 12 seconds, so it's pretty good duration, actually. I think the duration is the main selling point for this, and the continuous application for 12 whole seconds. Cooldown, 18 seconds, so you have a downtime of 6, and an energy cost of 70, so you're most likely going to be running a bit of energy recharge, most likely through a weapon. The Elemental Burst summarized is just an elemental applicator. Doesn't really provide anything innately, doesn't do anything kind of by itself. It's just going to be an elemental applicator through the absorption of an element, and that element is continuously applied that way. Pretty useful, but again, doesn't provide any bonuses other than that in terms of a number. Now, as for the passives, this is where we get slightly better, which is the first passive, Sophisticated Synergy. After using her Elemental Burst for the next 10 seconds, when there is 1, 2, 3, or 4 elemental types in the party, all party members' attack will be increased by 8, 12, 16, and 20% respectively. So, you need elemental diversity in a party to get the kind of supporting bonuses from Lynette, as, well, this is an attack boost to everyone in the party for having different elements. If you have 3 Animo, you're not getting shit. So you're going to need elemental diversity. The only concerning part is that there's not many teams that you do run where there's 4 different elements in the party for these bonuses. You're usually running about 3 to 2 different elements, generally speaking, but still a very useful thing, although it's her first bit of buffing. As for her second passive, Props Positively Prepped. After the Bogglebox cat is summoned, again, said in the wrong order, by her Elemental Burst, performs an Elemental Conversion. Lynette's Elemental Burst will deal 15% more damage. This is only for one of her usages, so it has to happen every single time. Essentially making it so this 15% damage only happens when you have an elemental reaction with her burst. It's not going to happen just when the elemental burst is used. You need to cause that reaction, which is extremely important to get that 15%, but it's only 15%, so it's not that crazy. And the last one is something to do with Fontaine Exploration. Whenever you're underwater, having Lynette in the party reveals the location of like air bubbles or some shit, something to recharge your energy. It's kind of for exploration purposes, not going to focus in on it. And overall, her kit, by the way, we're just going to take a look at the kit as a whole. It's like not that great. It's not that strong. It's kind of hard to kind of gauge what she is. There's a lot of damage here that you can do, but it's also infrequent as cooldowns are pretty high with 12 seconds on the skill, 18 seconds on the burst. Burst doesn't do much damage. It's application. The skill does damage, but it's high cooldown. It's kind of odd what she does, and it's kind of like indecisive as to baseline what she does. Base kit, you're most likely to be using her for her elemental application through her burst, which is going to be decent at best. The only problem here is that there's no innate buffing with this, and you kind of want a character who's going to be used for application and kind of this like off-field support. You want to have some innate buffing. You want to have some natural kind of boosting. And the only thing that it does, or she does rather, sorry, is attack boosting through her passive, which it's very strict on party composition. And so that's where it gets a bit tough into like the quality of the characters. When you restrict the party, you need 4 different elements to get the max buffing, and it's not that great in the long run. It can be kind of hard to gauge the value. Overall, I wouldn't say the character's 10 out of 10. I just say like a 6 out of 10 character, maybe 5 out of 10, teetering on 5 out of 10. Baseline. But she does improve in quality through the constellations though, which is what we're going to get into now. Now, going into the constellations, we're going to go through these real quick because they are all very, very simple. Taking a look at the first one, A Cold Blade Like a Shadow. When her elemental skills Enigma Thrust, which always happens on the press and hold, hits an opponent with Shadow Sign specifically, a vortex will be created at the opponent's position that will pull in nearby enemies. Simplified, you have to use the hold portion of her elemental skill to apply Shadow Sign to an opponent, and then the Enigma Thrust has to hit that Shadow Sign opponent, and you'll create a vortex that is a suction effect to group up enemies. Now, I should clarify, I don't know the power of this suction effect, but it's definitely not going to be something like Venti and his ultimate. It's not going to be something like Kazuha and his elemental skill. Imagine it to be something along the lines of what Faruzan or maybe Sucros's ultimate does. It's going to be a very small range grouping effect that's going to not really group anyone. So it's probably going to be useless, but it's still nice to have a grouping effect. Onto Constellation 2, Endless Mysteries. Whenever the Boggle Cat box summoned by the elemental burst fires a vivid shot, it just shoots an extra vivid shot. So you just have more elemental application, which is overall very useful for the support category, which is what Constellation 2 enables more so. Her ultimate is level up through Constellation 3, which is always very useful. Constellation 4, Tacit Coordination, increase the amount of elemental skill charges you have by 1, always very useful if you want to build for a bit more of a DPS, you know, go double and deal a lot of damage. Elemental skill through Constellation 5, and then C6, Watchful Eye, when Lynette uses Enigmatic Feint, which is her elemental skill and the Enigma's Thrust, she will gain an Anemo Infusion and 20% Anemo damage bonus for 6 seconds, which is the part that enables her to be a DPS. Her C6 is the part that's really the DPS focus here. Now, this is also the first time, I should clarify, that we see an Anemo Infusion on a physical weapon. I don't think we've ever seen this before. I don't think any character can provide this. We obviously have characters like Hazo, Wanderer, and Sucrose that have catalysts that deal Anemo damage, but this is the first time that we've seen an Anemo Infusion on a physical weapon, because obviously she uses a sword, which is very, very cool. But again, as I've said, this is the part that enables her to be a DPS, and this is the part that makes her actually usable for that option, as you now have a way to not screw up your kit, as character composition and team composition is very important for this. Now, as for the Constellation's values, it depends on what you want. Now, obviously, she's a 4-star, and it's not going to be too difficult, unless you're super unlucky, to get C6. But if you are very much minding your rolling and trying to not over-roll and trying to get minimum value for what you want, if you're looking for a support character, C2 is about the stopping point. That elemental application from the more vivid shots will be very, very useful in the long run. So C2 is about the stopping point for a support-style Lynette. If you're wanting DPS, C6 is unfortunately the requirement. I don't think her DPSing outside of C6 is going to be overly good, as I don't think the gameplay for portion of her value is high. I think the actual numbers are going to be pretty good. I don't think the gameplay is going to be good, as it's going to be a mixture of high Anemo bursts of damage, but then physical sword hits and whatnot, and so it's going to be very unoptimized in terms of build and then playstyle. And so, unfortunately, C6 for DPS, C2 for support. Now, weapons. Very simple for this character. She doesn't scale with anything really outside of attack percentage, no HP scaling, no nothing, and so 5 stars is very simple. All of them are fine. Obviously, the better DPS ones, crit rate, crit damage boosting is much better for her, as you kind of just want her to deal damage, as Elemental Mastery scaling doesn't do anything for her, you know, no Elemental Res shredding based on EM, so there's no need to go for that. So just go for any DPS weapon so she can deal more damage with your DPSs. All of them, Mistsplitter, Haran, Light Foliar, Primordial Summit, all of them work. Even Free to Swarm, even though it is an EM weapon, it'll be fine because swirl damage is based on EM, and so that'll be fine. Skyward Blade works. The only two that you don't want to be using is a Killer Favonia, as it's physical and she's Anemo, even with an Anemo Infusion at C6, and then Key of Kajni Soot, as it's unnecessary to go for a HP build with her, as no damage is based on HP. The 5 stars are out of the way. They're pretty obvious, let's be absolutely honest. So the 5 stars are very obvious with sword characters, because the swords are overpowered. The 4 stars is where it gets a bit more touchy. There's 3 best in slots, and they're going to be the 3 ones that you pseudo have to pay for. We have the 2 Battle Pass weapons, which is the Wolf Fang and the Black Sword. The new Wolf Fang is obviously from the new Battle Pass set of weapons, which is coming in Fontaine. So you're not going to be able to pre-farm this. Very good one. Obviously then the Black Sword. This one is more so if you have C6, by the way. If you have C6, obviously because it increases normal and charge attack damage by 20% on the passive, and then crit rate boosting. So it's going to be for C6 of her. And then the Blackcliff Longsword is the damage one. 36% crit damage with attack boosting for kills on the passive. Very useful overall. These are going to be like probably your best in slot for numbers from the 4-star. But there is one weapon from this list that plays to Lynette's strong suit and plays kind of to her style, and I think it's going to be her like canonical weapon, I think. Don't quote me though. And it's the Finale of the Deep. Now this weapon, let me just move myself around here. Let's put myself there. That looks kind of nice. This weapon plays to her strong suit. Now if you remember her elemental skill, she restores 25% of her HP, of her max HP, per Enigma thrust usage. Now, reading this weapon's passive, because obviously it's just a base attack attack percentage weapon. Reading this skill's, or weapon's passive, sorry, when using an elemental skill, the attack will be increased by, not at R5, at R1, 12% for 15 seconds. Very useful. And then a bond of life worth 25% of max HP will be granted. This effect can be triggered once every 10 seconds. When the bond of life is cleared, a maximum of 150 attack will be gained based on 2.4% of the bond for 15 seconds. Bond of Life absorbs healing for the character based on its value and clears after the healing equal to its value is obtained. So essentially, you press your elemental skill and the whole passive is done because you've used your elemental skill and you've gained that Bond of Life, and then when your Enigma Thrust hits, you've healed that 25% Bond Life, which then clears it and you get that 150 attack based on 2.4% of the bond. Now, you may need a bit of HP here. I haven't done the exact maths. I've just seen that this weapon works exactly how Lynette works, and I've just said that this weapon is going to be good on her. Now, it's not going to be her best, I don't believe. It's just raw attack boosting and an attack. So her raw damage is going to be high with this one, but I think the other three weapons outshine her just in terms of raw performance. But this one, I believe, is like free to play to a certain degree. I don't know if this is the crafted one or if this is just going to be on her banner, but regardless of where you get it, this is going to be played at her strong suit, and it's going to be another good one. After that, it's just attack weapons, attack percentage. I'm not going to really explain attack percentage weapons, but you can just go for them. They're just absolutely fine. They all just work in their own ways. If you want to go for a bit more of an energy recharge, ultimate-based one, then a Sacrificial Sword or Favonius Sword work absolutely fine. More so Sacrificial, as you'll get double usage out of your skill and get more energy, but Favonius Sword is also just fine. That's the weapons. Let's go into the artifacts. Now, artifacts is an interesting one as well. It all depends on what constellation, and that's really this character. It depends on your constellation level. Everything before C6, you're very limited in your options, and my full honest option recommendation is going to be just Viridescent Vanera. This is the best set for most animo characters, regardless of if they're a DPS or a supporter. Just go for Viridescent Vanera. 15% animo damage, swirl damage by 60, and decrease elemental res of infused element by 40. It's hard to not recommend this one. It's an overpowered base game artifact set, and so always use this one on most animo characters if you're unsure. If you're really unsure of what to use, Viridescent Vanera will always work. Going into, and even for the support build, by the way, but going into, if you have C6, and this is going into the DPS section of the character, when you have C6 and you're able to do damage with her, this is where you get into a few of the generic ones. You've got Gladiator's Finale. Again, it's fine. Attack boost and normal damage for sword characters is boosted as well by 30%. Very useful. Shimenawa's, it's a bit more if you don't want to use your ultimate. Again, I'm not showing these on screen as they're kind of like very old and known by now, but Shimenawa's consume some energy to boost your normal charging and plunging by 50%. Very, very useful. But one that isn't mentioned too frequently for the animo characters, as it's only really useful on one of them, is the Desert Pavilion. Pardon me, I'm stuttering for this one. The Desert Pavilion Chronicle. This one's only useful really on Wanderer, but what it does, animo damage boost for 15% on 2 set, and then 4 set, when charge attack hits, normal attack speed will increase by 10, and normal charged and plunging will increase by 40. Again, only really useful if you have C6, but still nonetheless very useful for Lynette, and you can make it work as she does have an animo infusion. One of the few characters that does. And then that's pretty much it. I'm not going to try to mention the Fontaine artifacts that we got, which is Marchesur and Golden Trope. I'm not going to mention those as I don't think they're useful on her. You can make Marchesur Hunter work, by the way. You can. It works, and it obviously does. But I just don't think it will be kind of what she does. I don't think you really need that. I don't think it's necessary. But again, it works. The crit rate boost, you'll be able to get all of it because of she has the HP heal and the HP drain. So you'll be able to make Marchesur Hunter work. But I just think Viridescent Vanera or one of the other sets will probably work slightly better. But the artifacts are pretty simple. Go just for Viridescent, unless C6. There it is. And then finally, final thoughts as well as characters. So, Lynette, what role does she fill? Well, it depends on your constellation level. Pre-C6 and practically up to C2, she's going to be what you expect Kazuha to do, what you expect Venti to do, what you expect Sucrose to do. She's going to be that kind of Viridescent Vanera applicator and a swirl doer. Obviously, as we've established, she doesn't buff naturally to the same degree that Kazuha, Venti, or Sucrose can, but she does do good application and kind of does a taunt mechanic with her ultimate, and so she'll be slightly useful in that regard. But again, she's at the bottom of the food chain, again, because she's one of these characters that's joining a pre-established powerhouse role, the Animo Resistance Shredders. It's a very powerful role, and Lynette, unfortunately, doesn't provide anything that can compete with these characters. It does not provide anything that can compete with the power that Kazuha provides and the CC that Venti provides. Just she can't compete, unfortunately. But she'll do a fine job. If you don't have these two characters, Kazuha, Venti, Sucrose, obviously, I think Sucrose is free. Don't quote me on that part. But if you don't have them, because some of them are 5 stars, Lynette can be just a fine option. She can be just fine. She just will be slightly lackluster. But if you do have a certain constellation, C6, unfortunately it is C6, you can make her a DPS. And I do believe that she probably will end up being a pretty good DPS. I don't think she'll be competing with the Wanderer, in terms of like raw numbers DPS, but I do believe that she'll be competing quite well with something like Hazo in terms of consistency. Hazo is a big numbers guy. I think Lynette might be a bit more of a consistency-based fighter. So, unfortunately, I don't think she's going to be the best in any part that she kind of tries to compete in, but she's a 4-star, and she's one of the new characters. She's a cool character. I do like her visually, and I do like a few of the concepts. Obviously, she's kind of like a Yelan with her elemental skill. I do like that a lot. And I think she's conceptually a cool character, but unfortunately the numbers aren't there to compete with some of these other characters. But that's fine. As 4-star, it's new characters. I'm kind of fine with it at this point. But yeah, that's kind of Lynette and how she fits into team comps. Is she can be a DPS at C6, but pre that, practically just an Animo supporter with a Viridescent Minera or something along those lines. And that's been Lynette. That's where she sits. I hope that was helpful. If you guys did enjoy the video, like and sub, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.